Silver Creek Amusement Park was once the pride of its town, a place where families flocked every summer to enjoy thrilling rides, sweet cotton candy, and the laughter of children. But that was over 30 years ago. Today, the park lay in ruins, its gates locked and its attractions decaying under the weight of time. The park was a ghost of its former self, abandoned after a series of tragic accidents that claimed the lives of several visitors. Locals whispered that the land was cursed, and no one dared to enter the park after dark. But there was one group of people who found the stories intriguing rather than frightening, a group of teenagers with a taste for the paranormal. Emma, Mike, Sarah, and Jake had heard the stories all their lives. They were the kind of stories that dared you to prove them wrong, and the group decided that on Halloween night, they would do just that. They would break into Silver Creek Amusement Park and spend the night there, documenting everything they saw to prove that the stories were just that, stories. The night was cold and moonless as the four friends stood before the rusted gates of Silver Creek. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the distant creak of metal and the faint echo of a long-forgotten melody that seemed to drift from the depths of the park. Emma shivered but tried to shake off the unease creeping up her spine. She was the one who had suggested the trip, and she couldn't back out now. With a bit of effort, they managed to pry open the gates, the metal groaning in protest as if it didn't want to let them in. The moment they stepped inside, the air seemed to change. It was thicker, heavier, and carried the scent of damp earth and something else, something sweet, like cotton candy, but tinged with rot. They made their way through the park, past the old ticket booths and the rotting carousel. The once bright colors of the rides had faded to dull grays, and the cheerful figures on the carousel horses now looked twisted and grotesque in the dim light of their flashlights. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of a rusted metal ride shifting in the wind. As they ventured deeper into the park, Sarah swore she heard the faint sound of children laughing. She stopped and listened, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come. The others teased her, chalking it up to nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The group finally reached the old ghost train, the ride that had been the park's most infamous attraction. It was here that the worst of the accidents had occurred. A train had derailed on a sharp turn, killing several passengers instantly. The ride had been shut down afterward, and the park had never recovered from the tragedy. The ghost train loomed before them, its once vibrant colors now faded and peeling. The entrance was a giant gaping mouth, painted to look like a monstrous face, but now it seemed more like the maw of some dark creature waiting to swallow them whole. Despite their earlier bravado, none of them wanted to be the first to enter. Jake finally stepped forward, laughing nervously. "Come on, it's just an old ride," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. He pushed through the entrance, and the others reluctantly followed. Inside, the air was even colder, and their flashlights flickered as they moved through the narrow corridors of the ride. The tracks were still intact, though rusted, and the old cars sat stationary on the rails, covered in dust and cobwebs. The walls were decorated with scenes meant to be terrifying: ghosts, skeletons, and monsters, but they were worn and faded, their edges blurred by years of neglect. As they moved deeper into the ride, the temperature dropped even further, and the air grew thick with a sense of dread. Then, without warning, the cars on the tracks jolted forward, the rusted wheels squealing in protest. The group froze in terror as the ghost train began to move on its own, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it careened through the dark tunnels. Panicked, they tried to find an exit, but the ride seemed to have transformed into a maze. The walls closed in around them, the tracks looping in on themselves, leading them deeper into the darkness. The sounds of the train echoed all around them, and with it came the voices, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, from the very air around them. "You shouldn't have come here," the voices hissed. "You'll never leave." The group stumbled out of the ghost train, their nerves frayed and their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They were back in the park, but something had changed. The air was thick with fog, and the park seemed darker, more menacing. The rides that had once been still were now moving, creaking eerily as if stirred to life by their fear. Emma clutched her flashlight, trying to steady her shaking hands. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded in agreement, but as they turned to leave, they found their path blocked by a figure. At first, they thought it was one of the old animatronics, a forgotten relic of the park. But as the figure stepped closer, they saw that it was a man, or what was left of one. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and empty, and his clothes were tattered and stained with something dark. He reached out a hand, bony fingers stretching toward them. "You can't leave," he said in a voice that was little more than a rasp. "We're all trapped here." The fog thickened, and more figures emerged from the darkness. They were the lost souls of the park, the victims of the accidents, and perhaps others who had ventured into the park over the years, never to return. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions twisted in eternal terror. The group backed away, but the ghosts closed in, surrounding them. "We have to get out," Mike shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The ghosts advanced, their whispers growing louder, echoing in the night. "Stay with us. Forever." Desperate, the group made a break for the Ferris wheel, the tallest structure in the park, hoping that they could somehow find a way out from above. They scrambled into one of the gondolas, and as they did, the Ferris wheel lurched to life, creaking as it began to turn. But the higher they went, the worse it got. The fog swirled around them, and the figures below seemed to multiply, their whispers rising to a deafening chorus. The Ferris wheel groaned under the weight of years, and the gondola swayed precariously. At the top, they could see the entire park, a twisted, decaying landscape shrouded in darkness. And in the distance, they saw the entrance, but the gates were gone, replaced by a solid wall of fog that seemed to pulse and writhe, alive with the spirits trapped within. "There's no way out," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. The others were silent, the reality of their situation sinking in. The Ferris wheel began its descent, slower now, as if savoring the moment. The fog crept up, tendrils reaching out to them, pulling them back into the park, into the darkness. The last thing they saw before the fog consumed them was the twisted, grinning face of the ghost train, its mouth wide open, waiting to swallow them whole. And then, there was nothing but silence. Years later, the legend of Silver Creek Amusement Park continued to grow. New generations of thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts came to the gates, daring each other to enter. But the gates remained locked, and no one ever saw the 4 teenagers who had ventured inside that Halloween night. Some say the park is still out there, waiting for its next visitors, the rides creaking in the wind, the ghosts watching from the shadows. And if you listen closely on a cold, moonless night, you might just hear the faint echo of laughter or the whispers of the lost souls who will never leave. Because once you enter Silver Creek, you never leave.